All gave some and some gave all, huh? 2,400 people dead. Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. No, this is not December 7th, but it's December 8th. Consequently, much of what happened on December 7th, 1941 has bled through into this day in military history for December 8th, 2013. Hello, everyone. My name's Tom Crandell, and you are listening to another edition of This Week with Tom Crandell. It seems last week I pressed a few wrong buttons, and Tim, I promise I'll do a better job for you tonight. I'll keep track of that log. It's not that complicated, but maybe I was on a roll, Mr. Producer. I don't know. Mr. Jeff is in the studio again tonight. Mr. Jeff, thank you. And had a customer ask me what channel on ATT Uverse here in Battle Creek?
99.
99. Channel 99 on Uverse. You can catch the show after he cuts it up and edits it and puts it out. And then on 98 on Comcast?
98's in Cadillac.
No, 98's in Cadillac.
Yep.
And
Channel 16 here.
Channel 16 here. And on Cadillac, we're 2 days now, fixed times. But what about down here? Does it float from day to day?
No, it's fixed down here. It's Tuesdays at 9 p.m., Saturdays at 5 p.m.
Okay. Here in Battle Creek, Tuesdays at 9 p.m. and Saturdays at 5 p.m. every week, fixed now, is This Week with Tom Crandell on Access Vision. Compliments of Mr. Freedom of Speech man there. Mr. Jeff, thank you very much. That's kind of cool. And actually, some numbers came in, some viewership numbers. Can I talk about those?
Sure.
I'll catch them off the top of my head. As always, though, it's a free show. Free to listen to, free to call in, 441-9595. And I would encourage you, especially, I have a question. Where is the strangest place you've ever fallen asleep? I saw a news bit this morning, and I'm going to bring that up. But you, the listeners, where is the strangest place you've ever fallen asleep? And we'll compare it to this gentleman that I saw in the news today, which I think is totally off the wall. But compliments of WBCK News Talk Radio, now a Town Square media station. And so we're very grateful for the opportunity to sit here and opine and just kind of talk as the BBs bounce around in my head. And that's really kind of what it does all week long. I'll be talking to someone else, they'll mention something else. Say, I'm going to mention that, and then I forget about it, and I try to write it down. But that's a lot of what happens on the show is just stuff that rambles around my head. And because honestly, I'm no different than anyone else out there. Stuff rattles around our heads, and we think about it, and then we talk about it, and then we kind of forget about it. And we have a caller on line 1. What's your name?
Fell asleep in a bus, standing up, with one hand on either side of the aisle, hanging onto the luggage rack overhead with my knees pressed against the seats to kind of hold me up, and fell asleep standing up driving down the road.
You fell asleep. You weren't driving, though, right?
I was not driving, no. I was at the back of the bus, but it was a military bus. We were crowded. Everything, all our gear was packed in there, and I fell asleep standing up. There were 2 or 3 other guys in there standing up with me.
Were there so many people around that you couldn't have fallen down then?
Yeah, pretty much. The people in the seats were keeping a hand on us, too, and... like one guy had a hand on my belt in the middle of my back, and if I started to go, he'd grab me
And you fell asleep standing up. That's a pretty good one. Because the guy on the news, and we had a caller in line too, and I'd like you to call back because, what's your first name, by the way? Who's joining us?
George.
George, are you up in Bedford?
No, I'm on the north side, but still in Battle Creek.
Well, George, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you calling in. That's a pretty funny story. I can't say I've ever fallen asleep standing up. Maybe in a dentist chair, though.
But I've heard of that before.
Well, it's the bright light, and you close your eyes, and, you just sort of fall asleep, I guess. But this gentleman, George, I don't know if you saw it in the news, but he fell asleep on an airplane that landed, and they must have cleared the plane, but they forgot this guy, and they shut the lights off, locked the plane, and that was it. And I'm thinking, how could you fall asleep on an airplane and then with all that hubbub offloading not wake up? George, thanks for.
I've got one more real quick one. I was waiting for my wife to come off a plane. I was in the waiting area back when you could go to the waiting areas and wait for them to deplane.
Yeah.
And I fell asleep in the chair, and when I woke up, everybody was gone. Everybody had already passed through, and I had to go and meet her down at the baggage point.
George, that's funny. Thanks for calling in. We appreciate you listening. Oh, and we have Dial Tone. I do not think that Dial Tone fell asleep. But if you have a strange story where you fell asleep, I'll give you the little details on what happened to this gentleman. He was on a flight, and the plane landed, and he was asleep. And he's rather a large fellow, is tall, height and weight proportionate, but he's a rather large guy. And he fell asleep on this airplane, and he didn't wake up until the plane was black. All the doors were locked. The plane was cold, and they had left him. And he had to get on his cell phone, call his girlfriend. She thought he was nuts. And of course, eventually he got off. The airplane company, the airline, they gave him a bag of peanuts. They gave him a $250 voucher for something else, and they gave him a free room. So that's pretty cool. Caller on line one, what's your name?
This is Sam.
Sam, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from East Leroy.
Sam, welcome aboard. Are you calling about falling asleep?
Yes.
And where'd you fall asleep?
South of Grand Haven, southbound US 31 on a motorcycle.
You were driving or riding?
I was driving it.
And did it end well or did it not end well?
Well, reasonably, yeah. But if you can remember the 60s, you weren't really there. It's kind of one of those nights.
Well, okay. And any idea how long you were asleep at the handlebars?
On the ground I covered, I'd say 10, 15 minutes maybe.
Holy smoke. You've got an incredible sense of balance. You could have joined the Ringling Brothers Circus, I think, with that balance. I
could have joined another group, too, with behavior that's stupid, but yeah.
I would imagine, and I remember the 60s because I was 10 and 12 years old. Not old enough to drive a big bike like that south of Grand Haven on 31.
Yeah, no, this was highly sports, so you'd think the vibration would keep you awake. But, like I say,
You fell asleep
but still.
driving a motorcycle. Well, my hat's off to you. Of course, I do know it turned out fairly well because you actually happen to be listening and you actually happen to join the show, so that's pretty cool.
Yes, I think so.
And, all right, well, this guy fell asleep on the airplane, I don't know. It's like when the airplane deplaned, everybody's in a rush to get off, and I don't know. He must have been really tired, so I'll give him that. Maybe he came from the 60s, too, like you.
Well, there's a possibility.
That's a possibility. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you listening, and I appreciate the funny story. He is one lucky dude falling asleep at the handlebars of a motorcycle, and of course, there are long stretches down there south of Grand Haven that's a long straightaway. And obviously, the potholes had not been present then, or they probably would have woken you up, too. But very good. Yeah, this guy fell asleep on an airplane and got locked inside and got a bag of peanuts for compensation. So there you go. All right. If you are Kalamazoo Way or north, the number, if you would like to call in, is 269-488-9595. And as always, in tribute to our military, I do like to begin the show with This Week in Military History. And it is rather short and it's rather condensed. Three of them are all in 1941 as things ramp up in the Pacific War. But I thought this first one was really most interesting. It was when it was welcome. It was when the soldiers were clamoring for it. It was when the executive branch embraced it. It was when Congress embraced it. It was when public opinion embraced it. 1861, December 8th, 1861, the American Bible Society announced that it would distribute 7,000 Bibles a day to Union soldiers. Contrast that with today. You can't have a Bible on your desk under the current administration's policies, and because it will offend someone. So if you've ever used a compass and seen the needle bounce between north and true north and magnetic north and what have you, this needle has gone off the chart. The American Bible Society announced that it would distribute 7,000 Bibles a day to Union soldiers. And you know, an interesting thing is, in my family, we have the Bible my dad carried with him in World War II. And it's a very small Bible. It was issued by the military. It's rife with notes. My dad was a prolific reader and a prolific note taker. And we have that Bible. And this is something I know my dad clutched it. I know he held it and carried it with him every inch he walked through France and Belgium and Germany and Czechoslovakia. And I know it gave him strength and it was encouraged. And today, what are our guys in Afghanistan doing? I'll tell you what our guys in Afghanistan are doing. Shades of Vietnam, spike in U.S. troop deaths tied to stricter rules of engagement. We're going to talk about that here probably after the break, which I'm a little past on, but that's okay. We're going to finish up this day in military history. 1941, December 8th, America's Pacific Fleet lay in ruins at Pearl Harbor. President Franklin Roosevelt requests, receives, and declares war on Japan. This date, 1941, December 8th, Japanese attack begins with the capture of Bataan Island and the creation of an airstrip for plane refueling. This date in history, December 8th, 1941, Japanese aircraft attacked Wake Island, and within hours of the fateful attack, that was within hours of the fateful attack on Pearl Harbor. And of course, they took Wake, and then they eventually murdered so many of our brave Marines and sailors. So therein ends this day in military history. We're going to take a break. Don't go away. Be right back. We're going to ask you more questions. We're going to ask you to call in and stay tuned. We'll be right back.
I've changed apartments several times. My roommates have always been trouble. Now, because of the economy, I've had to move back home. When my mom gets drunk, she tells me everything I do is going to fail. I get into arguments with her about her drinking. Dad goes to Al-Anon family groups. I didn't think Al-Anon would work for me, but every time I go, I feel better. If someone's drinking bothers you, you might find help in an Al-Anon family group meeting right here in our community. I found support there. You can too. Call 1-888-4-AL-ANON or visit alanonfamilygroups.org.
Have you heard? Scam artists are trying to trick seniors into giving them their Medicare number.
I heard that. This happened to my friend. A man came to her door wanting to sign her up for the new Medicare program. Well, when she got her Medicare summary notice, it was full of charges for services she hadn't received. So I did something about it. I joined the Senior Medicare Patrol, where I teach others to protect their Medicare numbers, review statements to spot false charges, and report suspected fraud.
Don't feel like a number, even though it's so easy to do so in today's climate. Please don't, though. Resist the urge to say, I'm not going to vote, it doesn't matter anyway. Resist that urge. Because we all have it. Except the extreme left. They always vote. Most do anyway. But you have to resist it. Hello, everyone. My name's Tom Crandell, and you are listening to another edition of This Week with Tom Crandell. And if I wince once in a while, it's because my disc between L3 and L4 has misbehaved in the last couple of weeks and seems to have leaked out some fluid. It hardened, and now guess what? I can't feel my left leg. So I'm sure my friend Dan at his printing company here in town would prefer that it would have pressed against the nerve that operated my vocal cords, because he thinks this is hate radio, which it's not. But if I wince, I'll try not to utter the expletives that occasionally bubble up to the top when it does happen. But And we'll try to keep that under wraps, right, Tim? I mean, I don't need a call from the boss man. Although right now I can't see the phone, so even if he did call, maybe I wouldn't answer. But then he'd email me, or he'd get on the screen here and he'd send me a note. And all right, yeah, this is kind of frustrating. Shades of Vietnam, spike in U.S. troop deaths tied to stricter rules of engagement. And there was a lieutenant who took over a platoon whose previous lieutenant had been killed in action, and he took over the platoon of some hardened combat kids, and was bound and determined to earn their respect. In some of the first interactions with the platoon, it didn't go very well. He did not earn their respect at that time. However, their next deployment out, they went out on patrol, and some of the a couple of his sergeants saw these two Taliban on a motorcycle passing their column. And of course, everybody knew they were just doing a recon. That's a Taliban tactic. Okay. Except these two had been involved in the killing of that lieutenant in that conflict, in that particular engagement. And they disappeared way out in front of them. They turn around, and they're coming back at a high rate of speed. And the platoon's sniper could not get a clear shot, was asking for permission. Lieutenant wanted to know if he had a clear shot. This guy responded no, but they did have sniper cover from another sniper, probably special forces of some manner, shape, or form. He declared that he had line of sight and he had a shot. Lieutenant gave the order, shoot. Well, those are two less Taliban that would kill one of our or more of our Americans. Well, this lieutenant was brought up on charges. He was court-martialed. He was found guilty, and he is now sitting in prison. And if you don't think that doesn't send chills up and down the spines of other lieutenants running other platoons, running other patrols out of that base and out of all those bases, turns out the number of U.S. battlefield fatalities exceeded the rate at which troop strength when it surged in 2009 and 2010. And it absolutely coincides with stricter rules of engagement. This is from, what is this, from Washington Times, December 5th. A connection between the sharp increase in American deaths and restrictive rules of engagement is difficult to confirm. More deaths surely stem from ramped-up counterterrorism raids and the Taliban's response with more homemade bombs. But it is clear that the rules of engagement, which restrain troops from firing in order to spare civilian casualties, cut back on airstrikes and artillery strikes. Can you imagine if Doug MacArthur or George Patton or Omar Bradley or those guys really were concerned with civilian casualties? I think their first concern were American casualties. The rules of engagement that were put in place in 2009 and 2010. 2009? 2010? Oh, that would have been after George Bush. They've created hesitation and confusion for our warfighters, said Wayne Simmons, a retired U.S. intel officer who worked in NATO headquarters in Kabul, as the rules took effect, first under Army General Stanley M. McChrystal and then General David H. Petraeus. Those guys were just doing what they were told. It's not an accident. It's not a coincidence that from 2009 to 2010, coinciding with these radical changes in rules of engagement, that casualties more than doubled. No wonder Mr. President doesn't call these families. Let's see. These generals did not like this. Retired Air Force Lieutenant General Thomas McInerney, a fighter pilot in Vietnam. We handcuffed our troops in combat needlessly. This was very harmful to our men and has never been done in U.S. combat operations that I know of. In 2010, the first full year of the troop surge, 499 Americans were killed. That's 5 times the annual death toll compared with 06 and 07. And troops peaked at 100,000 in 2011. Another 400 Americans were killed in 2012. Troop count decreased. Death toll fell to 319, 3 times what it was in 06 and 07. 06 and 07. 06. Oh, that would have been when President Bush was in charge of the war in Afghanistan. And, of course, all this coincides with an article out on WorldNet Daily, The Purge Surge, another commander is fired. This is from an F. Michael Malouf. He's a staff writer for WorldNet Daily and G2 Bulletin. He's a former policy analyst in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. And he goes to great lengths and he breaks down a purge, what he's calling a full-scale purge of the U.S. military by the current administration. And he points to one example: the commander of the U.S. Army garrison in Japan was summarily relieved of duty and civilian deputy reassigned pending a misconduct investigation. We'll get into that in a little bit. We're coming up on a break. 9 generals and flag officers have been relieved of duty under the current administration just this year, widely viewed as an extraordinary number, and several sources put the total number of senior officers purged during the last 5 years as close to 200. In response, prominent retired generals, ranging from Army Major General Paul E. Vallely to Lieutenant General William Boykin, a founder of the Army's elite Delta Force, seems like he'd be a guy we'd want to listen to. Medal of Honor recipient Major General Patrick Henry Brady have all gone on the record characterizing these actions as nothing less than an all-out attack on America's armed forces. We're going to take a break because this tees me off, and so we're going to stay with it for a little bit. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
Cans, water bottles, and clothes. These forms of aid cost more to ship than you think. Cash donations provide immediate and effective relief to those who need it, without the shipping costs. If we all do our part, together, we can provide help across the world. To learn more, check out CIDI.org.
The Independent Payment Advisory Board was created by the Affordable Care Act, and it is a board tasked with managing healthcare dollars, managing the expenses of healthcare dollars. Yeah, the president has judicial oversight, but IPAB doesn't. I'm telling you, this is scary. Mr. Producer, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone who watches the show on Axis Vision. Jeff and I are flattered that you would tune in and listen in. I would invite you to pay attention right on your calendar. Sundays at 6. It's live. You're welcome to call us, 441-9595. I can't help but think of our troops, all the men and women serving in the armed forces, all the handcuffs that are put on them. I don't know. You guys and girls, you deserve a real salute from those who are benefiting from your sacrifices, and some obviously giving it all. This purge. If you were listening before the break, we're talking about a purge. I'm going to get into a little bit more, but I think, when talk about not feeling like a number and feeling like your vote doesn't matter, and there are people out there, there are traitors out there, there are betrayers out there, there are subversive people out there. Joe likes to refer them as quislings. Right, Joe? Thank you. That's a good word for the day, quisling. That don't care, really don't care. They mouth the words, they go through the motions. I care about our soldiers. They really don't. They sure would like to not have Bibles on their desks. And now I'll bet you lieutenants in forward operating bases and captains and lieutenant colonel, I'll bet they don't care. if their men carry and women carry Bibles. But oh my goodness, you're in the rear echelon. You got a Bible on your desk, you're going to be in real trouble. A lot of these charges against this Colonel Eric Tilley, U.S. Army Japan, was suspended from his job by a general named Major James C. Boozer, commander of U.S. Army Japan and I Corps, for lack of confidence. Okay. Lack of confidence. They wanted him to elaborate on that. And guess what he said? That's right. He didn't. It would be inappropriate to make public the allegations because the investigation did not lead to findings of criminal misconduct. So we let you go anyway. And this article by Mike Maloof goes on and on and on, purging our war fighters from our effort. Perhaps purging those who might want to defend the Constitution should something happen. So we need to vote, and I brought this up once before. You have to fight the urge to give up. Don't give up. Don't vote for yourself. If you feel your vote doesn't help you, okay, fine. You don't count. But there are other people who do. There are other people who do need our votes. And if enough of us don't vote, look what we're going to get. We're going to get somebody in office who spent 12 days in the Senate and never really did anything. And then we're going to get some woman. What does it matter anyway that 4 people died in Mexico? What does it matter anyway? It's kind of old news. It's 3 months old now. Are those the kind of people you want leading this country? And that brings up the next topic. I've talked about Ben Carson before, and he wrote an article here, and I want to read you some of it. This is Dr. Ben Carson, pediatric neurosurgeon. I vividly remember as a teenager obtaining my first job with a regular paycheck as a high school biology laboratory assistant. It's hard to describe how excited I was to be receiving a salary and contributing to the upkeep of my family's household. But the biggest thrill was doing something important while at the same time acquiring many skills that would prove useful in the future. Through the kindness and interest of my high school science teachers, God bless them. He didn't say that, that's my ad lib. I gained great familiarity with many scientific techniques that enabled me to acquire a job in the science lab at a well-known university while I was still a high school student. Now, understand, he says, I was competing with college students for this job, but I had an advantage of experience, and that's work experience, which worked in my favor. If any of you out there ever beat somebody out of an entry-level type job because you'd sucked it up and worked at another entry-level job and had that work experience, I'd like to hear from you. The number's 441-9595. Because it's those kinds of lessons that teach us that one person really can make a difference. Now, he made a difference in his little area, and perhaps if that happened to you, you made a difference in your little area. I remember my first job at age 10. I can't believe my parents even let me do this, but I started mowing lawns. I could just hear a lot of mothers and fathers now, oh, you'll chop your foot off if the lawnmower runs over it. Well, our lawnmowers didn't have automatic cutoffs. If you left the lawnmower, the blade was still running. So you had to pay attention. Ben Carson goes on to say, I held a long list of different types of jobs as I was growing up. I think each of them provided valuable skills that I might not otherwise have acquired when I worked as a mailroom clerk. He worked as a mailroom clerk. I learned the importance of accuracy and speed as well as organization. I'll bet he made minimum wage. Huh? What do you think, Mr. Producer? Yeah, I'll bet he did. One minor error upstream could have many negative ramifications downstream, meaning no job is too small and no detail too minor not to require the utmost in attention and devotion. Now, this was from a kid who came from a single-parent home and was getting into trouble, but his mother made them start to read books, held them accountable to their performance. The job market in America is quite challenging today, and it is well known that in most states an individual can collect as much, if not more, from food stamps, housing subsidies, and health care subsidies than that person can by working a minimum wage job. If one is only interested in being sustained, accepting many forms of public aid makes a great deal of sense. I mean, you don't have to go anywhere at 8 o'clock in the morning. You don't have to answer to anyone. No one has to, no one says, Smith, you got to get 16 parts out this hour instead of the 12 that you did last hour. There's none of that. However, Ben Carson goes on to say, however, if the goal is to pursue the American dream, taking even minimum wage jobs makes even more sense. Between high school and college, I worked as a payroll office clerk, receiving barely more than minimum wage, but I learned a great deal about office machines and many of the intricacies of making sure that people were paid on time. When I worked as a student assistant to the police department while in college, I had the opportunity to meet many distinguished and well-known people from around the world and was exposed to things that I would never have seen otherwise. I think you mean when he went to work at the police department, he wasn't chief of police? He didn't demand to be the chief and be a manager? He goes on to say, when I worked as a supervisor for a highway cleanup crew, now there's a noble job. I mean, how many times do you hear people say, and I've heard it, and I know you have too, I won't take that job. That job's been, I'm way overqualified for that job. Well, perhaps that means you would do an outstanding job at that position because you have so many good skills to take it. So when he worked for a highway cleanup crew, I learned a great deal about managing people who were not necessarily eager to work. Hey, Mike, I know you're listening, and I know you work your tail off, but I also know you're probably exposed to some employees who maybe aren't so eager to do that, to plow that snow, Mike. I know. You know who I'm talking about, Mr. Mike. I know you do. But he learned a great deal about managing people who were not necessarily eager to work. Also, through relationships that I developed with my supervisors, I was able to obtain a much higher paying factory job the next summer. That's called networking, expanding your network of confidants. But a much higher paying factory job the next summer that eventually led to my dream summer job of driving very fancy new sports cars off the assembly line. Now, that would be a fun job. You're always driving a brand new car. You're the one who's putting the first mile on that car. And, of course, you can always set the radio station to what you want so that the next person gets in has to listen to what you like. There were many other jobs and many other opportunities and skills that were acquired, but the main point that Ben Carson's making here, the main point is that working leads to the acquisition of knowledge, experience, relationships, and opportunities to move up, all of which are important components of realizing the American dream. And some people want this guy to run for president. There were many other jobs and many other opportunities and skills that were acquired, but the main point is that, relationship, I'm sorry, I read that one. Some people will say that they agree with all of this, but that it is irrelevant because people cannot find jobs. I can remember people saying that about Detroit in the early 70s when I would return home and attempt to find a summer job amid exaggerated reports of the paucity of summer jobs for college students. Most of the students trying to find jobs were looking at want ads and posters with little or no success. I was almost always able to find a job without a great deal of effort by jumping on the bus and just traveling until I reached a location populated with many small businesses. I would start knocking on doors and letting the business owners or supervisors know that I was a college student home for the summer looking for a job. This was almost always successful because many of the small businesses did not have an advertising budget, but were delighted to see an industrious young college student looking for a job. The salary wasn't always the greatest to begin with, but I received frequent raises as I became more valuable to my employers. This is the hidden bonus of working. If you are a good worker who is highly productive and become valuable, the employer would be foolish not to make every attempt to retain your services. And I think that's really the key thing. I remember a young man named Tyler who came in looking for a job. And he approached one of the owners. And I remember the owner saying, well, what kind of grades do you get? I get straight A's. Do you do drugs? No. Can you arm wrestle? And the kid looked quizzically. Yes, I can arm wrestle. Well, then you have to arm wrestle my brother. If you win, you have a job. The truth is, Tyler, I know you're not listening. Even if he'd lost, he still would have had the job. Now, some of you who are listening know where Tyler works now and where he has worked for the last 2 years and where he will be working for the next few years because he'll be going to college here at Kellogg Community College. And all this, I tell you, all the world is just a blank canvas, and this kid is going to be able to paint on that canvas anything he wants. There is no pride. He loses no pride by taking any job on. And it all started with him doing exactly what Ben Carson did. He walked through the door and in a small business and simply said, I'd like an application. And that's all it took, and that's all he did. Many small businesses will not run ads in newspapers because they aren't going to get hundreds of responses of people who really don't want to work or aren't qualified, overqualified. If it's a sales position, I understand you're a mechanic and you're probably a darn good one, but you may not have the skills for a sales position. But there are a lot of small businesses who turn a lot of wrenches. It's those kinds of businesses that you can drive around and check out and perhaps find employment. And actually, just in the last day or two, Senator Rand Paul showed up in Detroit. There was no secret why he chose Detroit. Of course, it's in this bankruptcy throes. And he laid out a plan for an economic revitalization of Detroit. But he's also offered some opinions on extending unemployment pay. And we're going to get to that after the break because we do have a break coming up in a few seconds. And unlike last week, I'm actually going to do this one correctly. So you guys stay tuned. It's going to be a couple, 2-3 minutes. We'll be right back.
I want to thank everyone for making this day so special. Dad, you've been my inspiration. I love you.
I love you too.
And Mom, I miss you so much.
Type 2 diabetes steals the lives we cherish most, but it can be prevented. Know your risk before it's too late. Stop diabetes. Learn how at checkupamerica.org or talk to your doctor.
The Independent Payment Advisory Board was created by the Affordable Care Act, and it is a board tasked with managing healthcare dollars, managing the expenses of healthcare dollars. Yeah, the president has judicial oversight, but IPAB doesn't. I'm telling you, this is scary. Mr. Producer, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone who watches the show on Axis Vision. Jeff and I are flattered that you would would tune in and listen in. I would invite you to pay attention right on your calendar. Sundays at 6. It's live. You're welcome to call us, 441-9595.
You can't text and pay attention to the world around you, and you definitely can't text and drive. Every year, deaths due to distracted and negligent driving are increasing. In fact, while drunk driving rates have dropped greatly, negligent driving fatalities have skyrocketed. Find out more at negligentdriving.com.
Well, we aren't exactly going to advocate that, but we do have a caller on line 1. What's your name?
My name's Rick.
Hey, Rick, where are you calling from?
Battle Creek.
Hey, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Hey, what's on your mind?
I got a quick question. I was transitioning from the garage to the car a minute ago, and you were talking about this Tyler kid.
Yeah.
Is he local?
Oh, he's about as local as it gets.
Where does he work?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot there.
I thought you said on the radio where he worked.
No, it's a local small business that
Hardware?
Yep.
I know the kid. He is smart as a whip. I met him at the Springfield Do It Center.
You know, I think that sounds familiar.
Okay, well, I talked to this kid about a year ago.
Yeah.
And I was thoroughly impressed. I had to ask him, I said, how old are you? And he told me he was, I think, a sophomore in high school. And I said, you're wise beyond your years, young man. He was very knowledgeable at his job. I was just thoroughly impressed. And I stop in occasionally and just to say hi, I was that impressed.
Well, I'll tell you what. He is a microcosm of a Dr. Ben Carson. And
well, I'm not sure who Dr. Ben Carson is.
Well, I'll tell you who Dr. Ben Carson is. Dr. Ben Carson is Tyler, but he's just about 50 years ahead of him.
Ah.
And, you know, the basic human core that, you know, you wake up every morning and there's something to do.
Right.
And that's what kids like Tyler do, a lot of them, many of them. And it's
really?
And Ben Carson, he had a very tough upbringing in Detroit, eventually went to medical school, pediatric neurosurgeon, chief of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins.
Oh, can't get much better than that.
And then, unfortunately, President Obama invited him to speak at the prayer breakfast, and I think later President Obama was not happy with his choice. Because Ben Carson talked about personal choice, personal responsibility. And it boils down to people like Tyler and probably people like you.
Well, could be. Could be.
But this mentality that I'm too good for that job is what holds people back. And if you don't have that mentality, then the world's open to you. And you build on one job after. What was your first job?
A janitor at W.T. Grant's back in 70.
Now, when they hired you, did they make you the manager right off the bat?
Well, of course. I was the president of the company in a week. No, I was a janitor. I swept the floors and cleaned the bathrooms.
I'll bet you were darn good at it, too.
Well, I made a kind of career out of it.
Well, there's pride in any work.
Yeah, you're right.
And any job doing, if there's a job that's worth doing, it's worth doing well. And
I agree.
And you can, but the thing is, who's to say that a year or two after anybody like Tyler goes to college, gets a 2-year degree, or goes on, gets a 4-year degree, in many of their past jobs, there are employers that said, look, when you get this computer information degree, come back and see us. And then that kid's going to get a job that was never advertised at Michigan Works. It was never advertised in the newspaper. It was never on Craigslist.
Right.
It was never on any of the other internet job sites. It was made from networking and from proving your worth to customers that you wait on. And yes, that is Tyler. That was at that hardware store. I'm somewhat familiar with that store, but...
well, I'm just disappointed it's not open more hours.
Now, wait a minute. Some of us have a life that we need to eat. What kind of hours would you like to see?
Well, I don't know. They close off. See, I worked at a cereal manufacturer here in town. In the last 20 years I worked nights, 11 to 7.
Okay.
And when I retired a couple of years ago, I like nights. I don't get up till about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I don't go to bed till 7, 8 o'clock in the morning.
Did you know that hardware store is open at 7 a.m. on weekdays?
I didn't realize that.
Yes, we see a lot. They see a lot of third shifters coming in at 7 a.m. Yes, they do. And 7 a.m. 7 to 8. There's a lot of third shifters show up because it's the end of their formal work day, and they're gearing up for jobs at home.
Yeah, right. Correct.
And that is exactly the reason that store opens at 7. Is for one, they got bills to pay, but secondly, there's a group of Americans, there's a group of residents here who work third shift, and if stores don't open till 9, you're dragging your feet at 9 o'clock. You've just eaten dinner maybe, and you're thinking about getting some sleep because sleep is something you probably should have, shouldn't it?
Yeah, pretty regularly.
Well, I'll tell you what. Tyler appreciates the dickens out of you coming in, and make sure you come in again, will you?
Hey, I will. I'm stopping in tomorrow to talk to the man.
Let's see. Tomorrow is let's see. Wait a minute. I think he's not working tomorrow. Tuesdays are his first day.
Okay,
so
then I'll go in Tuesday.
Yeah, Tuesday after 3:30. I believe you'll be able to run into young Mr. Tyler. All right.
Did he ever say anything to you about opening an IRA?
No.
I talked to him a year or so ago. Like I say, maybe the second time I run into him, third time, and asking him what he was doing with his money he was making. And I suggested he look into an IRA, particularly a Roth. And I'll have to get back with him on that on Tuesday and see if he did do that.
I'm sure he's all ears and he's a bright kid. And what's your name again?
My name's Rick.
Rick, thanks for calling. Thanks for listening to the show, and thanks for tuning in.
I listen to you every week.
Well, I appreciate it. We're all grateful. Mr. Jeff, catch us on Access Vision. It kind of puts a different angle on the radio show.
Oh, okay. I'll try that.
All right, Rick, thanks for listening. That was pretty cool. And it is important to, whether it's a Roth or anywhere else, even if you just throw it into a savings account, it's important to pay yourself first, even just 10% of your net wage, and just stick it away. And with any amount of discipline, like from a guy who grew up in Detroit and ended up leading Johns Hopkins Pediatric Neurosurgery Department, a little bit of discipline will certainly go a long, long way. We're coming to the end of the show. We didn't get near the half the stuff we did, or that I threw out here, and maybe on TV you'll see what Mr. Producer has scanned over. But we sure appreciate you tuning in, and it's going to be cold. Dress warm. Get your snow shovels and your salt out. Have a great week.
Access Vision, your voice, your community.